There is a waterway 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It sits between Iran on the north and Oman on the south. Through it flows 20% of the world's daily oil supply, 35% of all seaborne oil, and roughly 20% of global liquefied natural gas. For 60 years, economists, military strategists, and energy analysts have called it the most important 30 miles of water on Earth. This week, it closed, for the first time in modern history. This is the story of the Strait of Hormuz, how it became the aorta of the global economy, and what history tells us about what happens when it stops beating. To understand why the Strait of Hormuz controls so much of the global economy, you need to understand the geography of oil. The Persian Gulf, bordered by Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, contains approximately 50% of the world's proven oil reserves. The combined proven reserves of Saudi Arabia and Iraq alone exceed 350 billion barrels. The United States, by comparison, holds 35 billion. But geography created a problem. All of this oil is landlocked in a semi-enclosed sea. The only exit to the open ocean is one narrow passage, the Strait of Hormuz. There is no alternative route. No pipeline large enough to replace the volume, no canal, just 30 miles of water between the world's greatest oil reserves and the markets that need them. In 1960, when OPEC was founded, this geography was an abstraction. The world still had significant spare capacity outside the Gulf. By 1973, it was a weapon. October 1973. The Yom Kippur War. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The United States resupplied Israel with military equipment. OPEC's Arab members responded with the oil embargo. They did not need to close the strait. They simply needed to redirect their production away from the United States. Because all their oil flowed through the same choke point, they controlled all of it simultaneously. Oil prices quadrupled from $3 to $12 per barrel. The United States economy lost the equivalent of $350 billion in today's dollars over 18 months. Henry Kissinger, then Secretary of State, later wrote, "The oil embargo demonstrated that the control of energy resources had become as important as the control of territory." In 1979, it happened again. The Iranian Revolution collapsed Iran's production by 5 million barrels per day. Oil prices doubled from $14 to $35 in 12 months. Inflation hit 13% in America. Paul Volcker had to raise interest rates to 20% to contain it. But here is the critical distinction between 1973, 1979, and 2026. In both historical crises, the strait itself remained open. Ships could still pass. What changed was the volume of oil moving through it. In 2026, the strait is not restricted, it is closed. To understand why the closure matters so acutely, you need to understand the economics of chokepoint disruption. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20 million barrels per day of crude oil and petroleum products. At $90 per barrel, the current price, that is $1.8 billion per day flowing through 30 miles of water. Every day the strait remains closed, that value does not disappear. It gets bid upward as alternative supplies are sought. The economic literature on supply shocks is clear. A 10% reduction in global oil supply raises prices by 20 to 40%, depending on how elastic demand is. The strait is not experiencing a 10% reduction. It is experiencing an effective 100% reduction of the traffic through it. The substitute routes are insufficient. The East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia can handle approximately 5 million barrels per day. Hashba pipeline in the UAE, another 2 million. Combined, 7 million. The Strait carries 20 million. The gap of 13 million barrels per day has no solution. It can only be priced. Rystad Energy's Claudio Galimbesi said this week, "We have not seen anything like this in the history of the Strait of Hormuz." He compared it to blocking the aorta in a circulatory system. The analogy is not hyperbole, it is anatomy. Here is how a strait closure translates into inflation in your grocery store. The mechanism has 6 steps. Step 1. Oil supply drops, prices rise at the barrel level. Step 2. Crude is refined into petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, all rise with crude. Step 3. Diesel powers the trucking network. 90% of American consumer goods arrive by truck. When diesel rises, the cost of moving every product rises. Step 4. Companies face higher input costs and logistics costs simultaneously. They raise prices. Or they reduce volumes, smaller packages, same price, shrinkflation. Step 5. Wage demands rise as workers feel the cost of living increase. Companies raise prices again to cover higher wages. An inflationary spiral begins. Step 6. The Federal Reserve faces a choice between fighting inflation and supporting employment. This is the Volcker moment. In 1979, it took 11 months of supply disruption to embed inflation deeply enough that 20% interest rates were required. As of March 2026, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for 8 days. Morgan Stanley's analysis this week confirmed real consumer spending begins to decline 2 to 3 months after an oil price shock of this magnitude. We're in week 1. Here is what the history of the Strait of Hormuz ultimately teaches. Geography created the chokepoint. 50 years of industrial civilization deepened it. Every pipeline built, every refinery optimized, every shipping route established made the global economy more dependent on these 30 miles, not less. Every energy policy designed to reduce dependence succeeded in building out infrastructure that required the strait to function. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, designed to buffer a closure, holds 700 million barrels. The strait moves 20 million per day. The reserve covers 35 days. The 1979 disruption lasted 11 months. Economists and historians have a term for this. They call it the efficiency trap. The more optimized a system becomes, the more catastrophic the failure of any single node. The Strait of Hormuz is the most optimized node in the global energy system. And this week, for the first time in modern history, it stopped. The Shadow Ledger. Financial history that explains the present. The strait has closed before, in theory, in threat, in near miss. History did not prepare us for the actual closure. It only prepared us to understand why it matters.